Hello everyone and welcome to another clash from the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Team Championship. It is Arystan Isanzhulov of Kazakhstan. He's an international master versus Daniil Dubov, and I couldn't decide whether to show you the game from the Rapid section or from the Blitz section because they're both incredible, so I decided to show you both of them. If you're only interested in one of them, you will have the timestamps below the video, but as usual, I recommend you check out both of them. They are incredible fighting games and you will love both the Rapid and the Blitz one. So let's check it out. And what I found most interesting when I was looking for a nice photo of Arystan Isanzhulov to use for my video, as there really aren't any, I found his Twitter profile where it says in the bio, says novice Counter-Strike player from Kazakhstan, former chess master. So I find that that piece of info, taking the games into consideration, even the most impressive feat of all of this. But yeah, let's check it out. So Arystan Isanzhulov, former chess player and a novice Counter-Strike player, opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now knight to c3. This is a game from the Rapid section, if maybe I didn't explain it all that well, but you do have the letter R on Meadow's head over there. We have knight to f6, we have the 4 knights game, and pawn to d4. E captures on d4, knight captures, and bishop to b4. We have knight captures on c6, b captures on c6, and now bishop to d3, and both players castle. So castles, and the rook to e8 by Daniil. We have queen to f3, nicely developing the queen, rook to b8, getting the rook off of that nasty a8 square, and now bishop to e3, developing the bishop and leaving the b2 pawn somewhat vulnerable, but you will defend that when it gets to that. We have bishop to d6, and now, okay, the b2 pawn is hanging, rook 8 to b1. There are also games where bishop captures on a7 was played right away, but rook to b1, rook 8 to b1, and it is now as of move 11 that we have a completely new game. So, okay, let's check it out. We have pawn to a5. Okay, grabbing more space on the queen side, stopping pawn to b4, bishop to f4. Arystan now offers a trade of bishops. Daniil obliges, bishop captures, queen captures, and pawn to d6. We have pawn to b3, now having firm control over that a8 square, and also allowing for the rook to enter the game, and knight to d7. Daniil shifts the knight over to e5. We have rook b to d1, and knight to e5. Attacks the bishop, bishop to e2, and pawn to c5. Grabs more space in the center, but it does weaken the d5 pawn somewhat. We have queen back to d2 and bishop to b7, putting more pressure on that e4 pawn. We have pawn to f4, challenging the knight, knight to d7, and now pawn to e5. Of course, you cannot capture on e5 as the knight would hang, so knight back to f8, e captures on d6, we have c captures on d6, and now bishop to f3. The winning, well, rather close to winning or winning move would be queen captures on d6. But Daniil is playing incredibly fast. You can see that he has 11 minutes on the clock. Arystan has 3.5 minutes. So a player like Daniil offering you the d6 pawn, I guess you just don't capture it. But there's nothing wrong with capturing it. There's no way for black to take advantage of this. For example, knight e6, bishop to c4, and the white's position is just amazing. But of course, I'm sure Dubov would find a way around that. With bishop to f3, bishop captures on f3, rook captures, and now knight to e6, offering the d6 pawn, but capturing the d6 pawn here would be actually losing for white because there's knight to d4, and now the queen is hanging, and if you capture the queen first, then knight captures on f3 comes with check, and then you just pick up the queen and you're up the exchange. So that's the trick there. So after knight e6, we have knight to d5, an excellent square for the knight, and knight to d4, also an excellent square for the knight. The rook is hanging, so rook f2, and the queen to h4. Daniil gets his pieces into the attack. c3 kicks away the knight, knight to f5, and rook to e2, offering a trade of rooks. We have queen to g4, now forcing a rook trade, or you force white to double up on the e-file, which he does. Arystan goes rook d to e1, and rook captures on e2. We have rook captures and pawn to h5. Daniil's plan, of course, is h4, h3. We have queen to d3, pawn to h4, rook to e1. Rook to e1 is very, very important here because if h3, you will not have queen captures on h3 with the rook on e2 hanging. So rook to e1 has to be played. king to h8, and now king to f2. We have knight to h6, and king back to g1. Queen to h5 by Daniil, and now knight to e3. Knight to e7 was a little bit better here, but, well, 1 minute on the clock. We have a knight to e3, and now pawn to h3. Queen to d5, offering a queen trade, and also keeping around that g2 pawn, but just queen to g6. And now pawn to g3. Yes, you are defending the g2 pawn with the queen and with the knight, but you also want to move them at some point. So g3 makes sense. Rook to e8, and now king to f1. So the knight can move. The rook will be nicely defended here. We have queen to f6, and now queen to d3, defending the pawn on c3. Rook to e6, adding a defender to the d6 pawn. Also, maybe you can use the rook later on to attack. And rook to e2. We have queen to e7, doubling up on the e-file, and knight to d5, offering a trade of rooks. Queen to b7. Now, if you move the knight, you have to be careful. Some queen to h1 action might be possible, but just pawn to c4. Nothing to worry about here. We have queen to c6 and pawn to g4, offering the g4 pawn for the h3 pawn, which you could allow, but first Daniil goes rook captures on e2. We have queen captures on e2 and queen to d7, going after the g4 pawn, so pawn to f5 and queen to d8, trying to somehow infiltrate the white king's position. Pawn to f6, beautifully played by Arystan. G captures on f6. We have queen to e3, going after the knight, and king to g7, defending. Queen captures on h3, and pawn to a4. Daniil wants to create some weaknesses on the queen side, but also playing against Arystan's clock. B captures on a4, and now queen to a5. And okay, it's a very complicated position, but all in all, Arystan's position is winning here. But only if you find the correct move. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for Arystan while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this very natural idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to c3. You offer a queen trade and also put pressure on this f6 pawn. You could also play pawn to g5 first, but that's a pawn sacrifice you don't really need, and you will get to play pawn to g5 if a queen trade is avoided. And the point is that if you try queen d8 to guard the f6 pawn, then just g5, and okay, you're completely winning here. What's interesting is that why is a queen captures on c3 so winning for white? Well, the problem is actually the doubled a pawn. And now after we play captures and knight captures on g4, let's say pawn to a5, okay, black will manage to reach the pawn because you do have this one check, king to e2, knight captures on c4, a6, knight to b6, and okay, you've stopped the pawn, a7, and now let's say you start advancing your own pass pawn and the king. Now you play knight to d5, you force the knight into the corner, because if knight captures, then just a8 queen, knight to a8, and now look at this, pawn to a4. It is because you have a doubled a pawn that your position is winning. King to g6, pawn to a5, and now after king g5, you just offer a trade of knights, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Knight c7, you will win the knight, captures, and now you just move the knight and advance this pawn to victory. Yes, you are down 2 pawns, but the knight, of course, gets the job done. So, of course, queens do not get traded off. Daniil realizes this very, very quickly. He didn't even spend a second calculating this. Queen captures on a4, and now knight captures on f6, threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries. Queen to d1 with check, king to f2, and now king to g6, getting the king out of the way. Pawn to h3, stopping any knight g4 ideas in the future. And queen to h1. Now, Daniil's position is lost here, but he does have a queen inside of white's camp. So, you know, it's very, very complicated, especially with the situation on the clock. Knight to h5, we have queen to h2 with check. Now, a series of checks incoming. King e1, queen g1 check. King e2, queen g2 check, king d1, queen f1 check, king c2, queen to g2 with check, king b3, queen b7 check, king a3, queen to a8 check, king b2, queen to b7 with check, queen to b3 blocking, and now queen to e7, preparing for a second series of checks, but Arystan now starts advancing his past a pawn. We have pawn to f5 by Daniil, trying to weaken the knight on h5, but knight to f4 check. King g5, knight to d5, attacking the queen, and queen to e5 with check. Queen to c3, and now you have to agree to a trade. F captures on g4. Queen captures on e5, d captures, and h captures on g4. And now we have knight to f7. Pawn to a5, getting the pawn all the way to a8. That is the goal. Knight to d6. We have king to b3, and king captures on g4. Pawn to a6, and knight to c8, guarding that a7 square. And now what you have to play in order to win this, and this is why I find this game very, very beautiful, is king to a4. King to a4, and this is the trick to winning. Pawn to e4, king to b5, king to f3, king captures on c5, e3, you give up the knight, and now your passed pawns are of course winning. King to d4, king to c7, and the knight has to either move and you promote the pawn to a queen, or you go here, and then king to b7 will pick up the knight. You don't have the b5 square, and that's why it's easily winning. However, Arystan found a different winning idea, or rather, he thought it was winning. He found knight to f6 check. Dubov played king to f5. Now comes knight to d7 and pawn to e4. King to c3, pawn to e3, king to d3, pawn to e2. King captures, and now king to e4. Daniil's king shouldering off the Arystan's king on e2. We have knight captures on c5 check, king to d4, and now knight to b7. We have king captures on c4, and now knight to d6 with check. This is one move that he missed, and it's a very, very important one. The problem is, how do you play here? If you capture the knight, of course, after knight to d6 check, if you play knight captures on d6, then pawn to a7, and the pawn cannot be stopped. But king to c5, Daniil says, I don't need a knight. Knight captures on c8, king to c6, and king to d3. We have king to c7, pawn to a7, so you cannot capture the knight due to the promotion of the a pawn, and now king to b7. And remember, when we've discussed, or maybe you know it by yourselves, when you have a bishop of the wrong color. So here, if you had a dark square bishop and the pawn, it would be a draw. If you had a light square bishop and somehow you could protect this pawn, it would be winning. But also, it doesn't matter if you have a knight, you still cannot advance this pawn to victory, because you can never move the knight without leaving the pawn hanging, and you cannot bring the king over to a6 to defend the pawn to then move the knight, because it would be a stalemate. So look at this. King to c4, king to a8, and now king to c5. Okay, just king to b7, king to d6, and now king to a8, and here we have king to c6, and it was in this position on move 84 that the players agreed to a draw, or rather, it was a draw by stalemate. And also, it doesn't help if you go the other way around. King to c5, king to b7, you go king to b5, king to a8, and now king to a6, and again, it's a draw. You cannot, sorry about that, you cannot keep an eye on the a pawn to move the knight, because, well, the king and the pawn are stalemating the black king. So it's a very, very useful stalemating resource that you can use in your own games. If it happens, don't just resign because your opponent is up a piece and a pawn. So yeah, that's what happened in the rapid section, but now we check out what happened in the blitz section, and this one is, it's giving me vibes of Tal versus Sviridov. If you haven't seen Tal versus Sviridov, it will be the first link in the description below, so check that out as well. So let's see it. This is the blitz section. Daniil with white opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6, knight to f3, d6, and pawn to c4. We have pawn to g6 and knight to c3. So this, transposing into the English opening. Bishop to f5, and now queen to b3. Here, popular moves are g3 and knight to h4. Daniil goes for pawn to b3, as all true attackers do. B6, and now pawn to e4. Already things are heating up. Daniil is sacrificing a pawn. And there is one game where this was played, but in that game, knight knight captures on e4 was played, which was followed by pawn to g4, attacking the bishop, and after knight captures b captures, sorry, not b captures, g captures on f5, knight returned, and bishop to g2 was played, which is not the best. Bishop to h3 is the best, and in the end, black even won that game. But here we have bishop captures on e4, and it is now already as of move 6 that we have a completely new game. So let's see what Daniil had in mind. Knight captures, and pawn to h4. So again, it really looks like nothing, like something you would use against your uncle maybe. h6, now comes pawn to g4. We have bishop to g7, bishop to d3, attacking the knight, and knight to f6, pawn to g5. So Daniil really making use of that pawn sacrifice. He's trying to win time here. Knight to g4, there's no reason not to play h captures on g5. Daniil would just play captures because, of course, h is impossible due to rook captures on h1, but it's 3-minute blitz. You have to play fast. Knight to g4, we have pawn to h5, h captures on g5, and now bishop captures on g5. Queen d7, and king to f1, getting off of all of the checks from the knight, and also well, announcing that you will not be castling this game. We have knight to c6, bishop to e4, putting pressure on this diagonal here, rook to b8, getting the rook out of harm's way, and rook to e1. This is also one of the reasons king to f1 was played, to free up the e1 square for the rook. We have knight back to f6, and now look at this. Bishop captures on c6, queen captures, and now pawn to h6. We have rook to h7. Remember, captures is impossible because of rook captures on h1. And now what's beautiful here is that Daniil's position is winning. He created a masterpiece here, only he doesn't realize it. Or rather, he doesn't realize it to the full extent of his brilliance. H captures on g7 by Daniil. The real move here is pawn to d5. And now, once the queen moves, and you really don't have all that many good squares for the queen, queen d7, now you play knight to d4, and only after that you will play h captures on g7, sacrificing both of the rooks in order to play bishop captures on f6, remove the defender of the g8 square, and then promote this pawn to a queen or a rook, and the king is denied the d7 square. So it sounds complicated, but I will show you what happened in the actual game. H captures on g7 right away by Daniil, rook captures on h1 with check, and now king to g2, sacrificing the other rook as well. Rook captures on e1, and now bishop captures on f6, preparing to bring the queen into the game as he now removed the defender. But now there's king to d7. Okay, we do have pawn to d5, and now you have to play queen to b7 or queen to a8. But in the game, queen to c5 was played, and now Daniil's position is again winning, but he doesn't find it. But feel free to pause the video and solve this one. It's really beautiful, you know. Have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. The move that Daniil played is knight captures on e1, but the move that actually wins is bishop to d4. You just kick the queen further away from the game, and after queen to a5, which seems to be guarding the rook on a1, now you capture the rook on a1. And queen captures on e1 is impossible due to queen b5 check, and now you have no squares. The king has to go to the back rank, and then the pawn promotes with check. So that's the real problem here. But Daniil played knight captures on e1 right away, and now we have e captures on f6. And there's no way to kick the king away. If you play queen to a4 with check, it's not a problem, just king to e7, and the queening square is defended. So after e captures on f6, what was actually played in the game is queen to h3 with check, and it was in this position on move 24 that Arystan Isanzhulov lost the game on time, even though objectively it's still a draw. But yeah, I mean, that's easier said than done. Or looking at this, really doesn't seem like it's a draw, because, well, pawn to f5 that does not go back with the king is met with queen to h8, and it looks like something you resign. But to tell you the truth, after captures and captures, objectively this is still a draw, even though white is up a piece, but you have so many pawns with black and your king is very safe. this is, if played to perfection, this is a draw. You will also capture the pawn on c4 and also some other pawns as well, and you definitely have compensation for a draw. But when Daniil played the queen to h3 with check, Arystan was already down to 3 seconds on the clock, and he just wanted to play something. He looked at the clock and it was already 0.00. Or no, I think actually Daniil pointed it out to him. Daniil was always mindful of the time, and he nicely pointed it out to him, and he resigned. But yeah, I mean, not bad for a former chess player and a novice Counter-Strike player. Definitely not bad. Drawing, well, almost 2 games against Daniil Dubov. That is definitely incredible, very, very impressive. And if you haven't fully returned to chess, you should definitely fully return to chess, Mr. Arystan Isanzhulov. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, if you haven't seen Tal versus Sviridov, first link in the description below, and I will also include a link to Chess-Based India's video of them actually playing the second game. It's really, really nice to check out, so do check it out if you guys are interested. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry for a bit of a longer video, but I mean, 20 minutes for 2 games, that's not out of this world, so yeah. Hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank the Animated Chemist, Roger Stone, Robert Artun, Karl-Heinz Haas, and Martin Georg Paparik for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day, and suggest some more games from this tournament. I'm sure we have more games like this one here. See you soon.